All right, so before we get started with the sermon, I do have a few quick things that we need to run through. Got to have a tough conversation today because our brewery is going to cost a little bit more money than we were initially planning. And by a little bit, it was about $1.8 million higher than our worst case scenario. All due to a plumbing issue that we did not know was there. The good news is Christopher didn't get any sleep on Wednesday night, and we stayed up all night racking our brain, and we shaved about $1.2 million off of that, so that was good. Bad news is we're still coming a little bit high, but it's doable. But we're kind of exploring other options right now. But y'all, I hate to ask for money. Like, we don't even keep it in-house. We give away like 50% of it on Sundays, but this is the time where we can really use some help if you're buying into the vision for the brewery. It's not going to like a Lexus for me or a private jet or anything like that, but if you want to donate to the brewery, I know Richard would love some help so we can figure this thing out. So we're not dead in the water. We've overcome worse obstacles. We'll figure it out. But if you feel called to help out, you can visit the donation station right there or talk to us after, and we would love some help. I don't like talking about money. I really don't, so we're going to move on really quick. So we're going to be in Mark chapter 9 today. Let's read this verse together, and then we'll talk about it. They went on from there and passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into humanity's hands, and they will kill him. And 3 days after being killed, he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, What are you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be the first must be the last and the servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." So I think there's a good to fair chance that Jesus planned on dying publicly. Now there's a verse that we're going to come to in a few weeks where Jesus says it's time to sell your cloak and sell your things and buy a sword, and a lot of people actually think that was Jesus' way of saying, "Hey, guns are cool." That's not what that verse says at all. That's like one of the most misunderstood scriptures in the Bible, because immediately after the verse, Jesus says that's enough when two disciples say, "Oh, look, we have two swords." Theologians believe that Jesus was saying we need to look like we're starting a revolution so that this is going to come to Roman leadership's attention, and then they're going to punish me. And this scripture kind of piggybacks off that point. I think there is a good to fair chance that Jesus planned on being executed. And I think Jesus knew that the resistance needed something that would ignite passion for the cause. And this is an unfortunate truth throughout history, right? I mean, the civil rights movement really took off after Martin Luther King was assassinated. And that's not saying that that's a good thing. It's not. It's a terrible thing. Power doesn't like change, especially when it affects them. But the unfortunate reality is change often happens when there's bloodshed, and it's usually ignited when the blood of an innocent leader is spilled. And there are other verses that hint at that as well, that Jesus was saying, "Hey, I'm going to die. I'm going to be executed by Rome." Now, my next observation is that the argument about who is the greatest between the disciples was really interesting, because I think Jesus was kind of interjecting a slam against the patriarchy of that day. Children at this time did not have the full recognition of personhood in that society. And I would argue that ancient Judaic cultures treated their children far better than other cultures around them. For example, Spartan cultures, which happened way earlier, they would look at a child, if they were imperfect in any way, they would just throw that child off of a mountain. So by comparison, the Judaic tradition was pretty wholesome, but it was still far from perfect. In the Old Testament, there are many verses that indicate that ancient Jewish folks believed that God actually punished children for the sins of their parents. Now, obviously, I don't agree with that, but that's what that culture believed. They believed that God punishes people by killing their children sometimes. We saw that in the story of Moses, right? Moses goes and warns Pharaoh, let my people go. Pharaoh says, man, don't want to. And God's like, oh, I'm going to kill your firstborn child. That doesn't sound like the peaceful, loving God that we see in the New Testament, but that's kind of how they understood the world to work. That children were valued, but they were less important than adults. There's a story in 2 Kings where the king of Moab sacrifices their son to save their lands from an invasion from Israel. Israel was going to invade these Moabites, and a prophet told them don't do it. They didn't listen, and they were starting to win, but the king of Moab went and burned their child alive, and somehow it mystically worked in some spiritual way, and it drove away the invading armies. Point is this, and the Moabites weren't Jewish, by the way, but the Bible makes it clear that children were not loved as much in society as men. And we've talked about how ancient Hebrew fathers controlled their daughters and even forced them to marry their rapist according to Levitical law. They had to have their father's permission, but if someone raped a woman by Levitical law, that guy was required to marry that young girl. Awful practice, terrible stuff. But there is some of it that's a little bit entertaining. I mean, it's like dark humor. Like, none of that was entertaining. This story is entertaining. In 2 Kings 2, 23 through 25, it talks about this really, really funny story. To me, it's kind of humorous in a very dark way. It's talking about Elijah. It says this: he went up from there to Bethel, and while he was going up on the way, some small children came out of the city and jeered at him, saying, "Go away, bald head. Go away, bald head. Go away, bald head." This is in the Bible. And when he turned around and saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. And then 2, and this is the quote, she-bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 children. Like, it's dark. I know it's dark. I can't believe it's in the Bible. Let that be a lesson to you kids, though. Never make fun of bald people, all right? Especially the ones that work for Jesus. Now, this happens to be Leonardo DiCaprio's least favorite verse in the Bible. Am I right? Anybody? Okay, I'll file that one under not funny. But this verse cracks me up because it uses the term she-bear, and it kind of alludes to the bears being female. And that's an unusual term, right? Like, how did Elijah or the kids know what gender these bears were? Well, like, did a kid feel that it was very important to recognize this bear's pronouns right before they got eaten? Like, oh no, he's eating me, wait, she's eating me, oh no. Now, I think pronouns are important, so I'm not making fun of that. I think we should respect them, but it's just in this verse, why does that matter? At what point is it important what gender the animal that mauled you preferred? And in Hebrew, this story is interesting because the Hebrew word for she-bear means menstruating bear, to add insult to injury to these kids. So to be clear, I say all that to say this: the Bible paints a picture of a culture in Israel that values adult men's ego over the lives of children. Like, a guy being called bald is more important in this culture than little kids being eaten by bears. Which we can grasp this type of culture of masculine ego, right? Because America, right? Very similar culture. So with that knowledge as your backdrop, what you see is a group of men in the story of Jesus arguing over who is going to be the greatest among them, right? Because no one else could be great but them according to the religious institution, because they were the men. Everyone else didn't have that value in this culture. Y'all ladies have seen this shit before, right? You've seen this? You know this kind of society? Men talking about who will have the most wealth and prowess and resources. And then Jesus looks at this toxic masculinity in the face and basically calls their version of masculinity inferior to attributes of compassion and nurturing children. Jesus went full feminist right here, y'all. Jesus turned the preconceived notions about how society should function at that time and turned it on its head. Christ was saying, if you want to be great, then show love to someone that is lower on the totem pole than you are. You want to live a life of abundance, then give something to those that can offer you nothing in return. You want to elevate your own social status, then give value to those that are looked over or forgotten in this world. The gospel has this way of turning unjust systems up on their heads. May we have the integrity to do so in a world where after 2,000 years, we haven't progressed much. We still value men above anyone else, specifically in this culture, straight white men, and that is wrong. It's disgusting. I think this really keeps our ambitions in check too, even as progressives, even for myself, right? You have to make sure that we're constantly lifting those that are marginalized in society. Amen? All right, now to clarify too what I meant, I got a little bit distracted. There was a lot of noise coming in. Christopher doesn't do well with change. What I meant by insult to injury with the bears menstruating, in that culture, I don't know if you remember, the woman with the issue of blood, does anybody remember that story about how society had rejected her because she was constantly bleeding? According to Levitical law, she wasn't allowed in society because blood was considered to be unclean, especially menstruation. So the insult to injury in the story is that not only were these kids mauled by bears, they were mauled by quote-unquote unclean bears because of the blood. But somebody pointed out something really interesting too. There's that fierce maternal energy that comes from motherhood. So maybe the bears were protecting their cubs, which is true. Matter of fact, I think that's what happens to DiCaprio in The Revenant, is he comes on a bear with their cub, and mom is like, not happening today. If you've never seen that movie, that is a tense scene. Don't. If you can't handle tension, it's rough. I think this really keeps our ambitions in check, though, when we read this passage, y'all. There are times when I sit and I dream about the book that I've been working on for months, when I think about the brewery that we're trying to open and the impact that it will have. And all of these projects, I think, if they're done correctly, they're going to be positive endeavors, right? I really think they are. But sometimes my ambitious nature gets the best of me. And when I try to do things for the community, sometimes I'll kind of stroke my own ego and think how awesome it will be for myself and for this church to leave a mark on this world, right? Sometimes my ego comes into play. And I believe the point of the Gospels is that we will naturally leave a legacy when we make an impact on someone's life. When we make a difference, we leave a legacy. So often we try to make our mark on this world and leave a footprint of how great we were. And sometimes, when we're trying to make things happen and make a difference, we can kind of get things mixed up. We go to marches, we volunteer one day a week, we give money to projects, we will help the poor in public, but sometimes we kind of stroke our ego in that process, right? Like, oh, look at us. Look how much better we are than everyone else. And we live this way and wonder why the world is going to hell in a handbasket. Jesus constantly points to opportunities to be able to build heaven here and now, and that doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to benefit us. The problem is we want to procrastinate getting our hands dirty as well, and the problem is when we do get our hands dirty, we want to show everyone how much work we've done, right? Look at my hands, look how much work I did. One of the quotes in the Bible that comes to my mind is that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. So many people want to talk about their ambitions, and they want credit for that. They actually don't want to do the hard work of restoring their community. And then so many people, like myself, we try to restore the community, but sometimes we kind of want recognition for the good work that we do. And the Bible doesn't really teach us to do either option. We're to make a difference because it's the right thing to do, not because it gives us any street cred. Amen? Like when we had our building, we'd run into that all the time. People would bring expired food to the pantry and they'd want to give it away. And I mean, I get that, at least they're thinking of the community, right? But there's still this concept of classism that they're bringing into their charity. I mean, I've had people literally, we used to do, a long time ago, when I lived in South Carolina, we'd do this meal for the public, and that was our tithe and offering. We would all come together and put all of our money into a pool, or we would spend it individually and prepare these amazing meals, like roast beef and prime rib and potatoes and homemade mac and cheese and biscuits and all of these like amazing home-cooked foods, and we would bring it and we would give it away to anybody that wanted it. And a lot of people that were struggling would come and they were really grateful because they couldn't afford to eat like that at home. And there were a couple times where people were new to the community and they would volunteer to bring food. And I know for a fact they were making much more money than I was at the time, and they would bring like Velveeta cheese and cheap pasta and cut up like Costco brand hot dogs. And they were like, well, they should be grateful for whatever we give them. And that mindset comes into charity quite often. And I think this Bible verse speaks to that, right? Like, we should look at everyone that is marginalized, that is turned away by society, and give them the same amount of value that we think we should have. Our own ambitions don't matter. What matters is eliminating the system of class that deems some worthy of respect and others cast to the side. I think it's important. And then there's also the people that kind of wait to get involved with service too. Like, I do that sometimes too. I kind of want to focus on my book or this brewery, and I'm like, oh, I'll do that later. I'll be more involved with this initiative later when I have the time. And then when I get done with the project that I've been focusing on, sometimes I don't join those initiatives like I should. Like, we put off giving and we put off serving so much. We think when we are doing better in life, then we'll get involved, then we'll make a difference. And I think that's a problem too. And let's bring that back to like how, as far as an application goes, in a societal, from a societal perspective, taxes, right? Like, there are so many billionaires that are like, look, I gave a few $1 million to this project, but if you look at the percentage of what they give nothing. And then you have people that are on welfare that are making $25,000, $30,000 a year, and they're getting 30% of their income taken away. $10,000 to a single mom that's working multiple jobs is a lot more money than $2 million from a billionaire. And I think it's important for us as Christians to demand better from our society. And I truly believe this. There shouldn't be billionaires, period, in this. Nobody earns $1 billion. You never earned $1 billion. And I think kids get this. I've seen videos where kids have bags of candy, right? They're giving huge bags of candy, and they start giving the rest of the class one piece of candy. And they're like, okay, this is basically how the economy works in America right now, and that's true. And the kids can tell that it's not fair. We just have this tendency to want to hoard things for ourselves, for our own glory, our own prowess, and our own ambitions. I want to share one story with you before we get to communion. I will never forget this day because it was hysterical. There was a group of Baptist church planners, and this is way back in my Southern Baptist days, so forgive me for that. But I was part of communities that were at least trying to do good locally. We were doing oil changes for single moms and for people that were physically unable to do that kind of work. I would do them free of charge every 3 months or so. And we were trying to get this group of Baptist churches to collectively take up that kind of initiative because we had about 450 homeless people in the county. And this was a very small county. So we're at a round table and we're talking about this, and this one guy is just seething. He's just pissed. And he stands up, and with a very Ricky Bobby-esque kind of demeanor, he's just like, I don't even know why we need to do all this. We can just help people on our own. My daughter was at home the other day, and some homeless person came up to the house, rang the doorbell, said he was hungry, and my baby girl went in the freezer, got him a frozen pizza and a can of beans, told him Jesus loved him, have a good day. And I was cracking up at this, right? Like, I was in hysterics, and they were like, Christopher, something funny? And I was like, yeah, well, if the person is experiencing homelessness, I doubt they have access to an oven or a can opener. So you just help this person by giving them nothing. There's so often we think we're coming from a place of charity when really we're not giving much. It's not truly a sacrifice if you don't feel it. Amen? So that being said, on the night that Jesus was betrayed, Jesus took this concept of temple worship where the rich could afford to buy lavish animals for the ritual, like lambs and cows, and they could participate in this worship service. And Jesus saw that and saw how unjust that was. And Jesus said, you know what? Everybody can afford bread. Everybody can afford wine. We're going to break down economic injustice within the temple system. And Jesus took bread at a table and broke it and said, this will be the body broken for you. Take and eat, and as often as you do so in remembrance of me. And Jesus passed this bread around a table of people from varying backgrounds and economic incomes, where they each got the same thing equally. And he said, take and eat. As often as you do so in remembrance of me. And then he poured out some wine, and he said, this is my blood. It's a new promise. Take and drink, and as often as you do so in remembrance of me. One of the most exciting things I've learned about communion in the last couple of months came from Bernie. I wish he was here today. That this symbol is not only a powerful reminder that we are going to be active in society and breaking down systems that cause marginalization, but this ceremony is actually where that transformation begins. It says, in this place, in this community, we will value each other equally, and we will give to each other as if we are giving to ourselves. We are all God's children, we're all beloved, and we're going to treat each other like that's true. So every week when you take this, whether you're a Christian or not, I think that's irrelevant. I don't think the point of us getting together is ascending to some intellectual understanding of who Jesus was. I think it's adopting the kind of society that Jesus believed is available if we have eyes to see it and the courage to step as if it's possible. And until next week, may the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever it may send you. May it guide you through the wilderness and protect you through the storms. May it bring you home rejoicing at the wonders that it shows you, and may it bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. Grace and peace to you.